Hare Ganga Mahadev Sri Shankara Parvati Pati Mahadev Sri Shankara.
Namaste, it's Sahara Rose, and welcome back to the Highest Self podcast, a place where we discuss what makes you your soul's highest evolvement. We have made it here to July. June has really brought so many of the shadows, both within ourselves and within society, to the surface. And this July, we finally have made it past the 6-month point of 2020. Yes! And we still have 6 months left. But I do sense this tipping point that has happened, that we are really reaching that peak of seeing everything that is not serving us, which I think is going to continue to unfold, but energetically within ourselves, learning how we can best serve, how we can best share, how we can best be involved. For a lot of us, and myself included, with everything that has come to the surface, particularly with the racism issue, it has been really hard on us. It has been difficult to see these senseless murders and the incongruence in our laws and just how much lack of regard there has been for so long on the disparities within our countries. And it has been really painful and really challenging to look at, but so important and long overdue. And in a way, it is the greatest thing that could ever happen to us right now, because it is setting up the rest of the paradigm of what it's going to be like, and everything that could not come with us to the new paradigm, racism, fear of the other, etc., needs to be addressed right now. We can't just slip it under the rug. We have to talk about it, whether it is in our yoga studios or in our judicial system or our police force or anywhere else where there are racial discrepancies. It is so important to bring it to surface. And I know I have been doing a lot of research myself. I have been interviewing guests throughout this month on Highest Self podcast who are Black, of African origin, and understanding their history, her story, understanding deeper into how we have been overlooking this racism so far to this point, and how it has even gotten to this level that is so heartbreaking to look at, and why we didn't pay attention sooner. So I needed to bring on Devi Brown onto the Highest Self podcast because I first heard her and I were both doing the Deepak Chopra retreat, which has been postponed, but we did a virtual retreat. She was hosting it, and I absolutely just loved her energy. And then I heard her on another interview, and some of the things she was saying were just so brain popping for me, like third eye blasted open, like, this is what the world needs to hear. So I knew I needed to bring her on the High Self podcast to share with all of you. She is a wellness educator, specifically helping women of color find their truth through meditation, self-discovery, and mindfulness. She's a Deepak Chopra certified teacher. She used to work in the music industry and transitioned into spirituality. She's the author of the best-selling book Crystal Bliss and founder of the self-discovery brand Karma Bliss. And what we really dive into in this episode is a deep dive into why we haven't been paying attention to this now. The spiritual bypass, which we spoke about on my solo cast a couple weeks ago, how we have a difficult time looking at the things that don't make us feel good. And we think that that's what spirituality is about, but it's actually not. So we speak all about this. We speak about the burnout that you may experience in activism, which, her and I definitely are going through. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going through. We talk about common things that people say, oneness, etc., but how it actually could be misconstrued when you don't have this anti-racism lens that you're looking at it. We speak about how, textbook examples of how this sheer racism exists in ways that are undeniable, and also the generational trauma that, someone being sentenced to 30 years in prison does for the entire family, the entire lineage, and generations afterwards. So This is such a great episode for anyone looking to do more anti-racism work, which is every single person can benefit from, regardless what your background is. For anyone that wants to understand this and how it intersects with spirituality, how spirituality and activism are really hand in hand, and how most of us have gotten caught into spiritual selfishness. And that's okay. You know, we can call ourselves out on that, of thinking spirituality is only about taking care of us, but it's also about, you know, connecting ourselves to the well-being of all other people, because we are not free until all of us are free. So we really dive into that spiritual activism in the 21st century, what it looks like, and how to not burn yourself out doing it. So this is an incredible episode. You're going to have so many gems of insights available for you. Be sure to have your notes out, because she is so intelligent, so inspiring, and really hits it home with this episode. So without further ado, let's welcome Devi Brown to the Highest Self podcast. And before we get started, I have an announcement for you. Are you ready to channel your full embodied goddess, to work that spiritual activism, to stand up for the causes you truly believe in and embody your highest self? Well, if this is calling your name, I invite you to join us in my membership community, Rose Gold Goddesses, the sacred sisterhood collective all about embodying the goddess within. This month, we are working with Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, who is all about transformation and using that sacred anger towards change. We are drumming, we are dancing. We have my full 4-hour healing and embodiment workshop available for you, teaching you how to use your body as an instrument for healing, for transformation in a divine feminine way. We also have so many other workshops and masterclasses available for you, from my Awaken Your Powers masterclass with Shaman Durek, to my Sex Money Magic masterclass with Alexandra Roxo, my Discover Your Dharma 10-day audio course, and dozens of other workshops, including many from guests on the Highest Self podcast and member-led workshops. So if this is calling your name and you'd like to join a community of 2,000 plus spiritual soul sisters on our very own app, where we're talking about all things spiritual, we're sharing what we're moving through at this moment and really supporting each other, then I invite you to join us at Rose Gold Goddesses. It is rosegoldgoddesses.com. The link is in the show notes, and I'm so excited to meet you inside. Welcome, Devi, to the Highest Self podcast. It's so great to have you here.
It is so great to be here. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to dive in with you, girl.
Yes, because last time we were face to face, you were introducing me for the Chopra retreat, which feels like a lifetime ago, but was like a month ago.
I know. What is time anymore anyway, right?
We're in the 5D. Time doesn't exist. So the first question I'd love to ask you is, what makes you your highest self?
What makes me my highest self is my commitment to investing in my spirit. I think that has been the hugest differentiating factor in me being, low frequency or high frequency. It's really about how much time and care I take with myself to really check in with both my shadow and my light, and then stand in the fullness of whatever my current embodiment is.
And you embody this so beautifully, because you are someone who's not afraid of talking about really the darker parts of the situation that we're in, the generational trauma, the unfair prison sentences between white and black counterparts who did the exact same crime, the experience of racism and lack of diversity in the wellness community, but also you show your children and you embody joy and all of the other, and you talk about how you're doubling down on self-care. So how are you able to kind of have like one foot in both doors, being an activist and also just being an embodiment of your highest self at this time?
You know what? I've really come to know in this moment in time how intrinsically linked spirituality and activism really are. And so like surrendering to that actually makes it so fluid and normal. I think, something that runs really rampant within people that are on the path to spiritual awakening or can mimic spiritual awakening, there is a lot of spiritual bypass and a lot of spiritual narcissism. So much. Bypass and narcissism run so rampant, and often it is packaged as being very positive, right? Like, oh, I don't want to talk about, I try to stay positive. I don't want to talk about that stuff. And what that really is just you continuing to run from your own discomfort. And oftentimes you trying to break down and ignore another person's experience. But we've given it more fancy language that feels good to our spirits. And so oftentimes people think that that's the right direction to be in. But to be in this moment of time and to be an activist, to call out injustice when you see it, it's the most spiritual thing you can do. This is what's actually required of us. When you're awake and aware, the only way to really utilize these gifts are in service to other people. And to be in service of other people is to hold space for them in their most difficult moments, right? It's to try to aid them when they're hurting or challenge people whose systems in place do disservice to humanity. So, I am very overwhelmed right now, to be quite fully honest. There is so much happening. Like collectively, we're doing so much deep processing in the ways, in a multitude of ways, right? Like from conversations we've had over the last 3 years regarding the Me Too movement, conversations we've had about the rights of all of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, and, all of the people that are now just starting to get their stories heard and get their voices heard, which has never happened in the history of humanity. And then moving into now, there being real shifts happening regarding racial inequality and social activism. And those conversations have been happening for hundreds of years. Those screams and cries and the brutality has been happening for centuries. But we are just now in this moment, probably in large part due to some of the self-awareness that COVID has given more people. We're finally in this moment where there is shifting happening and we're really being heard and there are changes being made. And with all of that comes exhaustion. There's a lot of emotional exhaustion going on, myself included. And so I am absolutely trying my best. I do realize that it is a gift to be alive at this moment in time. Like for us to be on Earth in 2020, as chaotic, as transformative, as humbling, and as heartbreaking as this year is, it's really a gift. I think it says so much about each of our collective souls that we would even decide to show up right now, to serve right now. So I'm balancing as best I can. Having a wild, amazing, super yummy 2-year-old has made life so much better because the days get heavy. Life gets heavy. And then being able to see magic in his eyes and be able to see, his development and be able to feel his joy ignites it in me too.
I love that. And it's really a good reminder of why we're even doing this. It's for your 2-year-old. It's for all of the children out there. And, I go on TikTok and I see these Generation Zs who are teenagers right now and just how awake they are, like how much they care. Like they made this funny video about someone who says all lives matter. They're like, oh, great. All lives matter. So do you want to talk about the trans people who are being killed? Or do you want to talk about the kids at the ice border? Or do you want to? And they're so aware of everything that is happening, but they still remain so lighthearted and playful. And I think that most of us have never experienced that dance. So we're like, oh my God, there's all this shit happening. We're so overwhelmed. And then it it turns very Facebook where everyone's just like fighting against each other. And then if you're happy in this moment, you're like the perpetrator, right?
Right.
But what I love, these kids just intuitively, maybe it's part of their souls. They know that this life is, the dance of duality. They're like these baby Krishnas coming forth and they're like, I can be blissful in this moment and play charades, and then the next moment be like dismantling patriarchy. And it's all part of the dance.
Yes. Oh my God. That's so true. It's so funny too, because it's like, it definitely to me feels like so many of the most ancient souls chose to be embodied in this lifetime. So we're really seeing this like ushering in of these divine beings that have a lot of wisdom, that have a lot of grace, that have a lot of ease in their ability to teach and learn coming into form right now. So it's a crazy time. It, as chaotic as it feels sometimes, I'm also like wildly excited to see how the next 5-10 years unfolds, like where we're able to get, because we're on an accelerated path right now. There is a reason that we are being thrown into forward motion, not even nudged or pushed, but we are being like slingshotted into processing and dissolving. So it's going to be incredible to see what we are able to manifest in the next 5 to 10.
And I love how you said that it's probably partially because of COVID-19, everyone having like all of their, sensory withdrawals like taken away from them, that you are taken back to bare bones. Then you look at things a little bit longer. And maybe if we were moving at that pace that we were previously moving at, we would say, oh, another Black guy killed by the police, another this, another that, and it wouldn't have phased us so much. Do you see that people's right now, maybe their hearts are opening to a greater capacity that this conversation is even happening?
I think it's a couple things. I think it's a mixture of also, like for me as a Black person and also for the Black community, it's really gotten to the boiling point of being utterly fed up. And also of recognizing our own worth in this world, and then being able to stand in the fullness of who we are and stand in the fullness of our story. I think like there has never been a time for the people who this affects that someone dying or someone being brutalized or someone experiencing systemic racism has not been just absolutely crippling and devastating. And I think for a long time, it was like anyone who was not Black, or, not to generalize, but a large enough group of people that are not Black, there was not a depth of understanding experiences outside of their own. So for them, they are thinking that all these little blips, all these little news stories that might catch their attention because they're underreported in mainstream media, but that might happen to make it through, they're thinking that these are the exception. And for the Black community, we've recognized that this has actually been the rule, so I do think social media has played a huge part in that. And the fact that it's like, most people spend their whole lives avoiding themselves. Most people spend their whole lives not knowing how to spend time with themselves or not knowing how to accept themselves. And part of the gift of, some of the social isolation and quarantining of COVID-19 has been, you don't have a choice anymore. Like this is the new normal. Self-awareness is the new normal. Choosing personal evolution is the new normal, or being forced to personally evolve is the new normal. That's being required of all of us. And I think that gift of a lot of this alone time, a lot of this boiling point frustration or emotional breakdowning that has caused people to now have to seek out other methods of care and help aside from like typical distractions. I think that that's created the perfect storm for all of the other dismantling that's going to be happening now societally.
So beautifully said. So you told an amazingly horrible, but a beautiful example of the systemic racism that is in our judicial system. And that was two boys who had committed the exact same crime on the same day and were treated differently. Can you share a little bit of what happened?
Yeah. So that, oh my gosh, that to me is one of the most perfect examples of the systems in place that change family structures for generations. And I think for a lot of people, again, because they are not acutely aware of what's going on, or it's too painful to really believe that it's going on. I thought I had shared this on Instagram, and I thought it was such a perfect example where it showed that in this state, there were two men. They were roughly the same age. I want to say between 19 and 21. One of them was white, one of them was Black. They committed the exact same crime of burglary, the exact same crime. Within the court world, there are like points. There's like a point counting system of how you come up with sentencing sometimes, depending on what the charges are, depending on your priors, depending on, so many different factors. Let me just stress, I am not a lawyer. So if I have lawyers listening, give me some grace. I'm trying my best to explain that process. So two boys, one Black, one white, same age, same crime, both went in front of the judge on the same day. Both had the exact same amount of points.
Same judge.
Same exact judge. The young man who was white for his burglary got sentenced to 2 years. The young man who was Black got sentenced to 29 years. So one of them is going to get out of jail still early 20s. The other one is going to get out of jail at around 50. So when we talk about the effects of systemic racism, when we unpack the impact of generational trauma, that perfectly illustrates it. This has now shattered a family's entire system, right? Like this person will no longer be an active member of their family or community. They won't have the opportunity to impact the world. Their family will mourn their loss. Their family will now be broken and dismantled because of that loss of him. And that will affect generations to come because we all pass down trauma, even when we have the best intentions. But when you add systemic racism on top of the spiritual curriculum that you've already come to this earth to explore, you are buried in a hole that takes hundreds of years for your ancestors and for your lineage to get freed from. And so there's no real way to look at that situation and to not see the inherent oppression that has taken place throughout the history of the United States. There's absolutely no rationalizing that. And I think before things were really documented, before we were getting clear examples of things, so many people, to avoid some of these really inconvenient and painful truths, especially ones that might require them to do something, have just been rationalizing it, acting like, well, if you don't resist arrest, this wouldn't happen, right? Or, well, if you don't commit a crime, this wouldn't happen. I mean, yeah, you got 29 years, but you shouldn't have done the crime. But now when we're able to see in real time, well, someone else that looks different did the same thing and will be out in 2, what's the real issue? What is the real system and who does it actually benefit and who does it destroy?
That is such a prime example of this. And I love how you showed that just systemic familial issue that's going to be caused from this, because now that's however many brothers and sisters they had. My brother is in jail for, essentially the rest of his life, my uncle, my grandfather, my son, my cousin. This is like everyone who's had a sibling that has ever gone through something knows how connected you are to your sibling's pain. So it's not this one guy is gone in a vacuum and no one else is affected by it. It's every single person. And as you shared before, whoever knew him and whoever loved him that is affected by it. And I think that this is just such a beautiful example of that, because then we can see that it's not about, oh, well, he did a crime. It's a lot of people are doing crimes of all colors. Why was he treated differently? And I also did some research that the man who killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin's wife, has actually gotten in trouble for the same thing, for a fake around $20 check. And is she dead over it? So
right.
When we see things like this, we're like, what is the difference here? It's skin color.
It's skin color, period. Period, point blank. It is what it is. We have to call it like it is. And I love that you brought that up about the officer's wife, because there was this other thing that I saw on Twitter that was so perfectly illustrated. It was like 30-year-old-ish white guy on Twitter, lived in New York, shared a story how he used a $5 or $20 counterfeit bill to pay for something. And now it's the funny story, the icebreaker story he tells at parties about, like, oh yeah, this one time I used a fake bill and I got this and ha ha ha, right? And for a Black man who actually, it was proven it was not a counterfeit $20, for a Black man, it ended in his life being lost and his child now not having a father, and all that we see happening in the world, because there was a thought that the bill was counterfeit and it was not. And even if it was counterfeit, he would have got a ticket, right? Like he would have got something small. There's no reason why his life should be taken, period. It's funny too, seeing some of the arguments that come from people, right? When they don't want to accept what is, when they are in fear of this reality, or when they are so filled with shame at their own behavior or at their lack of knowledge. And so instead, they move into a space of defensiveness. They move into a space of self-righteousness, instead of surrendering to what they don't know and creating space to evolve and ascend and become better. It's funny because there's so many big debates that happen regarding the death penalty, right? Like we hear people talking constantly about eradicating the death penalty, which I'm 100%, I stand in alignment with that. And many states have gone through that and repealed that. And then you have people who also argue about pro-choice being pro-life, being pro-choice, right? And what a woman can or can't do with her body, and demanding that every child, every embryo has a right to come to term and a right to be in this world. And you'll see those same people that argue for those things come up with rationalizations of how or why it could be okay that the police used lethal force in a situation against a Black person. And where is the alignment in that, right? Like, it's okay that someone, because you're assuming they resisted arrest, have their life stolen from them for an offense that wouldn't have even brought about jail time. But then you can fight for people to not be on the death penalty, probably people that look like you. And then you can fight to try to force women to bring to term children that they would wish to do otherwise with. Where's the sense in that, right? Like that. And I think it's so important for us to call out moments like that in very specific terms and in very rational terms, because we have to dismantle this defensiveness. We have to dismantle this internal shame that people have about being wrong, or that people have about not knowing more about the world or not knowing more about themselves. And I think when we can really get to that point where we're able to find the mechanism, or have perfected more so some of the tools of dismantling that inner barrier and all those barriers to healing that we all have, but especially the types of barriers to healing and personal growth that racists have, or closeted racists have. I think when we get to that point, we are really going to see some incredible shifts happening.
It is so crazy, because this morning I had the exact thought. I wish they cared as much about Black people as they do about unborn fetuses. And what's interesting enough is they're trying to get rid of Planned Parenthood, which a lot of times is Black teenage moms, oftentimes in rape situations or in situations that could compromise her life and her livelihood. But no, this unborn Black baby must be born. But this full-term 15-year-old who's still a child, no, they're not worthy of a life anymore. Like, I just don't understand. And so where do you think this comes from? This like discrepancy that's in so many people's subconsciouses?
Oh, man. I think it's so layered. I do think to a certain extent, and sometimes this is even hard for me to reckon with as we're in some of the more painful facets of this time, but we all come to the table to learn whatever we're meant to know, right? Like, we've arrived at Earth, these souls having this human experience, to be in the human condition and to learn whatever opposites we needed to know, to learn whatever lessons it is that we asked to be revealed to us. Obviously, in human form, that can manifest as a ton of different things to teach you the same lesson, right? So I think to a large extent, there's this overall spiritual shedding that is happening, but that has to happen for everyone. There is this advancement that has to happen. And maybe it comes down to, I believe in reincarnation. Maybe it comes down to, these are the people that spent lifetimes avoiding themselves. And so they've arrived at the same moment, right? The lesson repeats as needed. I consider myself to be a transcendent spirit. So I know that when I arrive at Earth, I'm checking things off my list, and I'm transmuting karma, and I'm going back up, and I'm coming back down for more, right? And that's kind of how I've always gone after my own personal growth and my personal healing. It's like, if I've recognized what the pattern in my life is, I now run into that pattern anytime it shows itself instead of running away. And so I think we have a lot of people that in human form and also in spirit form have been avoiding themselves for lifetimes. And so they're stagnant and they're stuck and they sometimes feel unmovable. And I think they're very scared. I think it's mostly a fear of themselves and a fear of the unknown and a fear of knowledge and an internal laziness, perhaps. To be awake and to be aware, it can be exhaustive. It is your life's work once you become awake and aware. It does require something of you. It is challenging. That's what it was designed to be. I think to a large extent, that could be part of it. I got to be quite honest. I have no idea the way a mind of a person who thinks and behave that way fully works, because it's so foreign to the way that I live and to the way that I express. I do, even in some of the people that could be considered worst case scenarios, I do try to find a thread of compassion so that I can better understand, so that I can better serve. I think it is important that we really look to, not only as we study the mechanisms of race and how it plays out in our lives and how it's played out societally since this country was founded, I think it's also important that to dismantle, we have to do a lot of investigation and study on the psychology of the minds of the people who live racist or bigoted lives or very apathetic lives. We have to investigate that. There has to be some research and some funding put there, because none of this is going to be fully dismantled until we can understand it. Just like it's not a matter of just choose love, right? Like that sounds good, but love is a verb. Love is an action. Love is a movement, a divine dance, an embodiment. And so I think that we have to keep that same energy of excavation and understanding that we apply to our own selves as we heal and as we transform. In order for any of us to rise to higher levels spiritually or to become our highest self, we have had to understand ourselves. We've had to understand the narratives that we've created. We've had to understand our experiences in order to dissolve them and move into a space of acceptance, love, joy, peace. And I think the same is true when we look at what are some of the processes for dismantling. We can no longer put a Band-Aid over it. We can no longer spiritually bypass. We can no longer weaponize positivity. We have to look at it with honest, clear eyes in the fullness of its shadow, in the fullness of its light, call it out for what it is, call the emotions by name, call the experiences by name, and then dissolve them.
I have some friends and there's a group of a lot of people who call themselves recovering Catholics. And this friend of mine is super, super spiritual, but used to be, think meditation was satanic, thought abortion was like you were basically a murderer, thought gay people were horrible until he found out that he was gay himself, and basically had to just go through all of his thought processes. And I think that we're passing this point of just organized religion, because these organized religions have been distorted. They're pure, like the mysticism of Christianity is very seldom there in what we're being taught in, just a typical church in the United States specifically. So I think a lot of times we formulate our beliefs based off of what our caretakers and community have told us. So if we're told, okay, you're a pro-lifer, anti-gay, anti-immigrant, you're like, okay, this is who I am. And I think we also haven't normalized changing our minds. We think that if you change your mind about something, you're a failure, you're not reliant anymore. So even with this new information, we're so congruent to how we grew up that even if you share this story with me, I'm like, but that means mom and dad and the saint or whoever were wrong. And I can't let that be, because that's going to shatter my entire belief system. But I see this happening so much and so beautifully from within the communities of people. I think Agape is such a great example of this, of Reverend Michael Beckwith saying you can have the beauty and the mysticism of Christianity and have it be inclusive to all other worldviews and life choices.
Yeah. Yes. I think there's so much beauty in all belief systems, right? At their core, they're all saying the same thing. It's the hero's journey, right? Like they're all getting to the same point of us coming into a space of self-realization, connectedness to source, and then being of service. Every religion ever created, every story ever told has that common theme. Now, the thing about, and I can only speak to America because my understanding is as someone that grew up here, as we experience religion here, religion has also become a tool of oppression, right? Religion has also in many areas become a tool of avoidance for many people. And you get told that you're better than other people or somehow more righteous if you belong to one of these collectives. And so then you think that just because you say you're something, that means you are, and that you are superior to other people. And so then you start being in judgment of everyone else and in no way, shape, or form work to understand anyone else's experience, have compassion, or have empathy, right? So it becomes kind of like this system of ranking. It becomes its own hierarchy. I hear so many people say that, if you just say that you're a Christian, then that's enough. And it's like, no, you're still required to do the work. None of us can avoid the work that's called on our life for us to experience ourselves and experience God. And I think religion for a lot of people is more so used as a tool of avoidance and as a tool of control, And so when you see those systems in place, like those religious systems and also those family structures where everyone just blindly parrots things that they've heard or regurgitates large amounts of information that they haven't even intellectualized, let alone embodied, it creates this codependency of sorts. It's like a religious codependence. It's like a narcissist and its victim almost sometimes, and you don't really understand how deep it goes until you get on the other side of it or until you invest in yourself some more excavating and some more adventure and some more curiosity and finding other pathways to yourself. Religion, just like everything else, it can be weaponized. Our families, our sense of loyalty, all of those things, everything has a light and shadow aspect, so there is opportunity for there to be aspects of even the best things that are not actually serving or healthy for you.
We'll take a quick break so I can give a shout out to our sponsors. Are you that person that all your friends and family members come to when they need wellness advice? Are you constantly looking up new ways to heal and balance your mind, body, and spirit, including listening to this podcast? Well, have you ever considered having a career becoming a holistic health coach where you get to decide your own hours, work with people, tackling the subjects that you are the most passionate about, and having financial freedom along the way? Well, I'm so excited to be teaming up with my very own alma mater, Institute for Integrative Nutrition, to offer their biggest discount yet. You'll receive $2,250 off tuition, an extra bonus that they're offering just with my Highest Self podcast listeners on how to launch your dream book. This course is going to get you super clear on what your book is about and how to bring it out into the world. I've created a webinar for you on how to have a thriving business as a health coach. So using social media, creating passive income, how to have a wait list of clients and become the best known coach in your niche with raving testimonials. Tickets to a live upcoming IIN conference where I will be meeting you over there. Super excited to connect. And a bundle of all digital wellness guides like Ayurveda, self-love, whole food eating, etc. So all you have to do is head over to my show notes. You'll see the link over there. It's a little bit.ly link. It'll take you right there. You'll be able to receive a sample class, check out the curriculum, get all your questions answered. And I'm so excited to have you on this mission, raising the vibration of the planet together as a health coach. Again, head over to my show notes. You'll see the link right there, and I'll see you inside. A lot of us don't feel comfortable going to supermarkets right now, and cafes are closed, which means we aren't picking up green juices or even buying fresh produce as often. But right now, it is more important than ever before to keep our immune systems high, especially with greens and superfoods. I've been drinking Organifi Green every single day, and it's been a goddess send. It contains immune-boosting ingredients like moringa, chlorella, spirulina, wheatgrass, ashwagandha, turmeric, lemon, mint, and so much more. It takes only 1 minute to add into my water, and I feel so good knowing that at least I got my greens in for that day, which frankly I may not have had otherwise. I've also sent it to my family members to keep them healthy at this time too. You can receive 20% off your Organifi at Organifi.com using coupon code Sahara. Again, that's Organifi, Organifi.com using coupon code Sahara, and that link is in the show notes. I think it is so important to have this conversation because so many people are afraid of even, just like we have been so afraid of talking about politics. Now we're into politics. We also need to talk about where the root of these beliefs come from. And if we don't talk about religion, then we're never going to understand the full picture. A question that I have is a lot of the Black community grew up Christian, and there is a quite large amount of homophobia too. How do you see Black communities, gay communities, Mexican communities, communities that have actually, in a way had their own divisions amongst themselves come together to actually go, against the oppression that keeps everyone back?
Yeah. I think first things first, you have to dismantle white cis supremacy, because the effect that colonization has affected all of us, and it's also turned us against each other in so many ways. we've only been allowed to exist in relation to what white supremacy has allowed for us, right? So first, that's what has to happen. First, we have to stop and dismantle those systems and create a space of equality, and then heal from all the other stuff that we never wanted to be in the first place, or that we never wanted to have, all the other biases that were a byproduct of the systems in space in place that structured our lives. I think all of those things will kind of work themselves out. We'll be at a point where we can have more expansive conversations and hold more effective space for one another, for our differences. But the common denominator for all of us in terms of systems of oppression is white supremacy. That happened the second we decided, the founding fathers of this country, or so they're called, decided to leave Europe and come here, and from that moment forward, we were all at the mercy of white supremacy and the structures in place. And it's turned us against each other. It's turned us against ourselves. It's created this inability sometimes to accept different things because we haven't been accepted in any way, shape, or form. So when you're taught self-denial, when you're taught to not hear or see another person's pain, and when that is held up as true because your own pain is never seen or heard, we're just human beings. You can't hold effective space for everyone else, or stand in the fullness of your authentic self, or operate as your highest self when someone's foot is constantly on your neck. So I think that would definitely be the next stage as we dismantle these systems. We extend so much more grace, so much more openness, so much more love into all the facets of our life.
Yes. And this divide and conquer method is, the oldest play in the book. That's what has created arbitrary borders in Africa, Middle East, Latin America, put opposing religions or tribes against each other, handed them both tons of AK-47 so they would wipe each other out. And then the colonizers can take the spices, take the diamonds, take the oil, whatever they want, while everyone is so focused on the Shias and the Sunnis, the Hutsis and the Tutsis, putting together these people who are essentially the same, but making them think, that's your enemy. And it's happening again. And I'm seeing it even happening today in social media. A lot of people who are on the same side are so focused on making that other person like the perpetrator when it's not. And I'm seeing this division happening, which is causing a lot of our burnout. So I would love if you've had any experience, being an activist with other activists of you're not doing it right, or it should be like this, or it should be like that. And people more focused on tearing down each other's forms of resistance rather than the actual oppression.
And that's so tough. And you're so 100% right. I think that those are I try not to get too invested in any of those narratives either, because I think that that's just a further byproduct of things that are unhealed inside of all of us, right? We can't fix everything in a day. We're not going to get to everything in this lifetime. So I think that, we have to recognize the biggest gift that we have is the ability to be in observance of ourselves, and the ability to shift our perspective when needed. It's the closest thing we have to a magic wand. It's the closest thing we have to attaining world peace, right? It's continuing to look at ourselves, to observe ourselves with non-judgment. And so, I think unfortunately we are all walking around as wounds sometimes, and we are all unhealed in so many ways, not just with the systems in place, but all the complex trauma that has caused on each of us. And then add in our own spiritual curriculum, add in our egos, add in our insecurities, add in our very flawed human forms. I think that we are always going to experience that to some degree, at least throughout my lifetime, I'm sure. But, I think it's just important that when we're in experiences like that, where our ego begins to take over, it's to get really centered and grounded in what are we fighting for? What do we want to change? What is a way that I can show up and feel seen and heard and extend that to someone else, even if I disagree? I think it's in this moment, especially, we also have to do a lot of ego checking. What is ego and what's real? What is the coping mechanism of self-sabotage? And what's real? What can we actually effectively change and heal right now? And what can we promise to look at a little bit later when we have the emotional capacity to hold space for it?
And I think it's so important for people to recognize that there's hundreds of years of trauma that is
Yeah.
resurfacing right now. So a lot of people are like, I'm trying to help. Why are they so angry at me? And, the tone policing comes. So can you share with us, some people feel maybe attacked, like they said the wrong thing, they're feeling attacked, and it can further perpetrate the stereotype of the angry Black woman. And then the white fragility also gets further because they're feeling like, I can't get it right. And then the white tears come, and then we just keep replaying the same narrative that existed since the beginning of this country. So how can white people feel like not so attacked when a Black person is expressing their sacred anger for what has happened?
Yeah. So one, you have to get over yourself. You feel attacked because you're uncomfortable with your history and you're uncomfortable with your placement in the world. But that is a beautiful opportunity for you to see how other people have experienced being alive that are not you and that are not your friends. So I think, to be quite honest, I don't have any space or capacity to worry about a white person's fragility or a white person's defensiveness in this moment. That is not my job. And that is 100% your own stuff and what you need to heal. The saying goes, hit dog will holler, right? If it doesn't apply to you, if this is not who you are or who you've been, then you shouldn't be offended by it. And you should just use it as a further example of what you are helping to fight for and break down. I think when we think of white fragility and white defensiveness has come to be because of the trappings they've put in place, because of the systems they've put in place, and a fear about those systems, a fear about the truth of self, and a deep discomfort about the effect that it has had, and a deep discomfort about the amount of privilege that you may have experienced because of it. When we think of a stereotype of angry Black woman, that is not actually real. That stereotype came about to further help white people not engage with things that make them uncomfortable. The whole idea process behind an angry Black woman is so flawed and it's so dangerous because what it really is, it's also a feminist issue and a race issue. What it really is saying that I want to keep hurting you, but I don't want you to have a right to feel anything about it, and I don't want to listen to you. So I'm now going to give you a negative title that somehow is very narcissistic in process for people that are familiar with like the system of sociopaths and narcissists. It's like you villainize someone else and then judge them for being upset or hurt by something you did to them. So that's where that stereotype comes into play, and that was, I think it's to be angry is valid. If you are a Black woman who has not just experienced systemic racism, but you've also experienced sexual oppression, collectively, you are in a system where you are the most seen and most unheard in this country, and you are dying at a high rate by just giving birth. You're denied medical attention because people are assuming that you are over-exaggerating. And also there was this stereotype that Black people could endure more pain than white people.
I heard that.
Right? And that goes
by the
back.
founder of gynecology. He was doing tests on Black women without any anesthesia because of this stereotype that Black women don't feel as much pain.
And the stereotype came about in slavery when you are looking to subject people and treat them as animals and treat them as not human. It's the same thing when we burn cows, right? Like when you are hurting cows and you're using electric shock or doing any of the things that we do to our animals, you do that because you can't hear them when they're in pain. You do that because they don't have a voice or the ability to speak. So you tell yourself, well, they're animals, they don't really hurt. Right? It's the same thing. The same mechanism was put in place during slavery because you would treat human beings like animals, and then you wanted to be able to do anything you wanted with their bodies, amputate pieces of them as punishment, whip them as punishment, rape them for pleasure and for punishment, rip away their children, right? So that is what began first, that narrative that has become racist rhetoric, and then led the person who invented gynecology, per se, to have that same stance and push that narrative forward. It's so layered. But it's like, think for a second, right? Like, even if that stereotype were true, which it isn't, even if that stereotype of being an angry Black woman were true, to take a moment and sit in compassion for how that narrative came to exist. You have been dominated and oppressed and broken for hundreds of years. Would you be angry? Would you be frustrated? Would you be at your emotional capacity? Would you be numb inside? Right? You potentially grew up in a broken home because of these systems in place. You most likely experience daily microaggressions about your existence. And you were undervalued and underpaid in every sector, in every field. When you go to the doctor, you're not believed. There is a high percentage that you could die while having a child. Historically, people in our community have been tested, right? Like you think of the Tuskegee experiments and syphilis being injected into Black men, and then they were watched slowly dying instead of helped. You think about all of those gynecological experiments, there's so much. There's so much. And so for anyone that tries to make light of the anger or the pain of Black people right now, is for you to be living in a very shallow space and really not have a full understanding of yourself, let alone the rest of humanity. And I don't say that as a judgment, but it is very specific. It is very real, And so that's not to vilify anyone that feels that way, but that is to say, hey, this is your moment in time to step up and become more of who you're supposed to be. This is your moment in time to get out of your own ego and to get out of your own experiences and expand and stretch and become more, So yeah.
So beautifully stated. Thank you so much for that download from source. And I read this quote, Black lives matter more than white feelings. And, we have to temporarily get out of our kumbaya circle where everything's great and talk about the fact that some people in the circle have been raped, brutalized, oppressed, and things that I think are so hard for people to fathom, as you said, that they'd rather pretend that it's a story, that there's overreaction, or use terms like, well, you're playing the victim card, or, well, if you keep repeating that narrative, then isn't it going to keep showing up for you? Or what you focus on persists, so let's not talk about it. And it's just such a way of gaslighting. It's truly gaslighting someone's experience and say that, well, because I don't know how to handle that, we might as well just ignore it because it's too painful to go to the depths of it and the uncertainty that I think a lot of people have of, I don't even know how to fix this.
Yeah.
So what can people do right now who are maybe they're yoga teachers, healers, they're in the wellness space and they really want to be allies, activists, but they don't know how. And also they're afraid of tokenizing Black people right now of I think a lot of people, I'm sure you're getting calls left and right. And I'm sure part of you is where were you at before? And I think a lot of people feel that they don't want to be jumping on the bandwagon. They really want to make a lasting difference. So how can people support right now?
I think it's important to really spend some time doing some gut checking, really checking in on what is your purpose, what's your dharma, what's your mission, and how can you use those unique gifts to be of service in this moment of crisis. Not everyone is meant to be a scholar about this, right? Not everyone is meant to be a protester in this. But what are the ways that you can help move the world forward? And specifically, if you're coming from a spiritual community, and, you believe that we're all spirit and that, all of these social constructs are not real in the spirit realm, then it's important that you also act that way, right? That you don't separate yourself in this moment as in your human form as being other or being different from what's happening. You have to take up the cause of humanity. I think obviously there is a lot of tokenism happening. I haven't had that experience because this is my work. These conversations we're having are conversations I've been having before this happened. So this is the space that I occupy and that I feel very grateful to be of service in and to continue to grow in. But I think it's important to educate yourself. It's important to self-check. If you're in the spiritual world, there are a lot of tools that you have access to. So use them for yourself right now. Use them for your own self-care. Use them for your own measuring tool of where can I heal and grow right now? What is this triggering in me and why? And can I heal it? Can I dissolve those walls? Because the more whole each of us becomes, the better we all benefit, The more whole each person who becomes who is having a difficult time understanding the world right now, the better for all of us. So I think dive in, be of service. I think it's also important to do your own research on things that you want to learn about. You know, something that happens a lot is everyone's like rushing to their Black friend or rushing to a Black person and saying, show me, teach me how, right? It's not a Black person's job to now, as they're fighting their own fight, also give you a master's degree in something that you're just looking at for the first time. And I say that with love, you know, pace yourself. You're not going to amass all of the knowledge that we have about what's happening in a weekend. This has been our life. This has been the stories passed down from generation to generation so we could protect ourselves, you know? So give yourself some grace with that, but also like be diligent. This is human history. This is not just Black or white. If one of us is unseen or unheard, all of us are at the end of the day. No system can really flourish unless everyone has opportunity and unless everyone is treated with dignity and with respect and with love and with value and worth, you know? So I think it's just important to start looking at the experience that we're all having from a more spiritual standpoint, really understanding like those levels of transformation and really understanding that cycle that we've applied to ourselves for growth and for healing, and looking at the world through that lens and applying it to us all, applying it to this particular moment and the dismantling that's happening and the shedding that's happening. But specifically, if you work in this space, like as a yoga teacher, as a meditation teacher, what I can really say is do more of that. Keep doing that as you are informing yourself, as you're learning about people's barriers to healing, as you're learning about your own barriers to healing. Like, you have the skills, you have tools. A lot of people in this space have the credentials and the certification programs. So now expand yourself and say, how can I extend all of this vast, beautiful knowledge I have to also be of service to people I'm not that familiar with? You know, I don't want to vilify anyone for working for the community that looks like them. I work for the community that looks like me. All of my work in business is in service to women of color, all of it. That doesn't mean I'm not also plugged into the rest of the world, into other people's experience, that I don't also have deep friendships with people who are not Black, you know, like, and it doesn't mean that I can't also be of service to people that are not Black. So I think it's important that for all of our healers, for all of our light workers, to just sit in your gifts, really explore your gifts and say, how can I use them more fully? How can I share them with people that I don't know or that don't look like me or whose stories I'm not familiar with? That's the true art of being a teacher, being a guide, being a guru, you know, whatever you consider yourself. You're for everyone. These healing teachings are for everyone. And you just find new translations of how to connect them with other people.
So beautifully stated. Thank you for that. And I think a lot of people struggle right now looking at their communities, and it is mostly white if they are white. And it's interesting because in my membership, we're over 50% women of color. And I'm like, people ask me like, why is that? I'm like, well, maybe because I am a woman of color that they might resonate or feel more safe. But I think it's a price point thing, you know, like if things are super, super expensive, you're actually going to marginalize and cut out a lot of people of color. But I think it's also energetic. So what advice do you have for white teachers of any sort who want to have a more diverse audience and community, but don't really know how to begin that?
So the issue with like the whiteness of wellness, it's pretty layered. It's pretty layered. I'll start there. It's pretty layered. I think that there is a myth to some extent that price points are outpricing Black and brown people, because Black and brown people make money too. You know, like it's not now within every racial group, there is that socioeconomic hierarchy, right? So you have rich white, you have middle class white, you have poor white. Same thing for us. You got rich Black, you got middle class Black, you got poor Black. Every race has these kind of structures in place. I think what it really is, what's keeping Black and brown people out of a lot of these white spaces, it's just when you walk in, you know, this healer and this teacher has not educated themselves on experiences outside of themselves. So I think the more that teachers can really invest in other people's experiences and learning about how to translate their tools, their healing, and their skills to be of service to sometimes more complicated healing. Because the thing is, if you are Black or brown in this country, your healing is to a large extent, at a higher percentage, more complicated than your white counterparts, which is not to say that white people don't struggle and suffer. Not at all. We all come to this earth with some crazy spiritual curriculum, and there's no hierarchy for pain. The difference is if you are Black or brown, you have that spiritual curriculum, sometimes those awful experiences, those really terrible traumas. And then you also have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, which means that your pain is renewed daily, which means that every day on top of the pain that you already carry and the life experiences that you've already signed up for in a spiritual way, you also now have the systems of oppression in place that keep you stuck in this space of undervalue and worthlessness. And so it's a lot harder to climb out of that, right? Like a lot of times as we're doing our spiritual healing and our spiritual growth, like we come into the understanding that we are worthy because we exist. No other reason, not because of a job title, not because of this, not because of that. We're worthy because we are the essence of God and the frequency of love, right? And that's what really has helped set so many of us free and helped set so many of us on such a deeply spiritual path. If you're a Black or brown person, especially in this country is what I'm speaking to, you also then, you're trying to get to that point with your healing, but then everything about life and its systems are systematically, continuously telling you that you are less valuable, that in fact you are not worthy, that in fact you are not safe, right? That in fact you cannot trust anyone to care for you. Dismantling that is so hard. Dismantling that is so stressful. And so I think what keeps so many Black and brown people out of these white establishments is the fact that walking in that they don't understand any of that. And that if you share yourself in some ways, you're going to feel marginalized and you're going to feel minimized because someone is just going to tell you it's mind over matter. Think positive, let go of your narrative, let go of your stories. You have to choose to heal. They're just going to tell you all of those things and regurgitate that information without actually seeing what your distinct and unique experience is. And I think that is one of the biggest barriers of why white teachers tend to have all white students. And so again, I really want to bring it back and really extend this with so much love to any light workers, teachers, and healers that are listening or aspiring people in this field. It's not enough to just figure out how to heal yourself, right? That is the biggest part. And my God, with full authenticity, I say congrats to you. Because as I know for myself, it's been the mission of my life to heal myself. And through healing myself, I'm able to help heal other people. But you also have to be continued education, right? Seek out, be curious, try to find answers to questions that you don't know, and really enforce your teaching, really enforce your tools with that. And I think that's how you'll be able to better connect to people that don't look like you and keep them in attendance at your programs.
Oh, that was amazing. You are such a queen. Thank you for that. And I think that is really going to open the minds of so many people who've been perpetually asking themselves this question. And I do know a lot of people right now are trying to make an active measure to have that diversity, but without that foundational education, you're not going to keep them. You might give a couple scholarships, but do they want to keep coming back? Do they want to tell their friends no until you understand? And it's so fascinating right now seeing how a lot of these spiritual truths are being revisited right now from this systemic oppression lens, that it's not so simple of, oh, you create your story and it's all in your mind, because now we're seeing that we don't live in this perfectly just world, that we live whatever is in our mindsets. In a way, I wish we lived in that world. Maybe in another dimension we do, but in this 3D plane that we're in that has had so much just wrong shit happen, purely bad shit, And I think that it kind of shatters a lot of people's beliefs that, well, if I just change my mind, everything in my reality will change. So if you just change your mind too, everything in your reality will just change. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens to a lot of these spiritual truths when we're looking at the systemic oppression that has literally been withholding so many people from actually living that.
Yeah, God, that's such a beautiful and perfect point, because even when we think of some of our, and these are all like spiritual and universal truths for sure, right? But we have to create some space for new interpretations based on changes since they were written and said. American racism didn't exist when the Yoga Sutras were written. It doesn't make their teachings less real or less true. But then how do we also now actively apply them to conditions that did not exist when they did? You know? Yeah, I love that point.
Yeah, I think it's going to cause us to go so much deeper into our beliefs and deeper into looking at like what is darkness. Like sometimes I think, how did people even let slavery happen? Like how is everyone just like okay with this? But I'm like, it's the same people who are okay with the police brutality happening, you know, the same people. There's so much war and suffering happening that we're somehow okay with. So when you realize it in ourselves, we can realize that there is a big power of groupthink, right? If you're not concerned with it, then I won't be concerned with it.
Yeah.
And now that we're in a way getting rid of that and we're all becoming more radical, independent thinkers, then if you start to see, oh, this issue is actually really bothering me, then I'll start to listen to you, and then maybe that will wake me up too. So it is going to be a very fascinating next couple of years on how this all unfolds.
Yeah. And you know, it's like that quote where, you know, it said, if you really loved and accepted yourself, you could never hurt another. Right. So I think it really brings it back to that collective consciousness ascend. I think it's okay with people because they've never really valued themselves. And they've put on this false show and this arrogance of being better than or being superior or supreme to. But it's actually shown that they don't care about themselves that much, right? And that's why their hearts and their lives are filled with hate and unhappiness. And they aim it at the people they think there will be no consequences for hurting.
And it comes from self-loathing, and it comes from it being a quick win, you know, like I don't have my life figured out, but at least I'm not that person over there. And it's just a bunch of people pointing the finger, and that feeling like a little boost, even though it's a complete fabrication. So there's going to be a lot of tears coming forth, tears that needed to come forth of people who just never truly honored themselves. So even though it's heavy, I am excited for it. It is the shift that needed to happen.
Yeah. We're blessed. We're blessed to be alive right now. I feel grateful AF to be here in this moment and to be able to, in whatever kind of way, serve at such a monumental time in human history. Like for hundreds of years, they'll be talking about this time that we were alive for hundreds of years.
Yes. And I truly believe that we will live in the new earth. Like it will happen in our lifetime, and we're going to go back to our grandkids and great grandkids, and they're going to be like, there was racism? What? How did you humans let that happen? We're like, we know it was crazy. Yeah.
It was
so good. So crazy. There were a lot of social media fights because a lot of people were triggered at the fact that Black Lives Matter. Apparently that's a very, a very out there thing to say. I saw this funny, I don't know who it was. It was like a comedian from a couple of years ago. And they were like, we're just saying Black Lives Matter. We're not saying Black lives are superior, just Black Lives Matter. Would Black lives exist? Be a little bit more comfortable for you? And it's just so interesting to see the fact that this is even a triggering topic. That is what's fascinating. So, and I know you're doing so much great work on this. So where can listeners learn more from you, connect with you, and join your community?
Yeah, hit me up on IG, Devi Brown, DEVI, Devi Brown. And from there, you can link to all my stuff. So I have a website, devibrown.com. I have karmabliss.com, which is where my community lives and where crystals and all of those beautiful magical tools, tangible tools live. And I have a podcast called Dropping Gems. So you can hear my musings on all of the things.
Thank you so much for sharing, for doing this work for so long, for creating safe spaces and being such a beautiful bridge. I think this episode, and for anyone who's listening who this was an aha moment, please share it with anyone else who's like been trying to wrap your heads around these conversations. And thank you for like being so open and even allowing me to ask these things that you're like probably having to explain so much. And I'm sorry on behalf of humanity that you even have to keep explaining this. And I thank you so much for doing this on behalf of everyone who can now have that understanding and share it with someone else. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the beautiful work that you do. And thank you for extending your platform to me. And it was just really a joy to unpack some of this with you today. So I'm grateful.
Wow. Whew, how deeply powerful were those words spoken by Devi Brown. This is such important and excavating work that we are doing now, long overdoing, but now is the time. Because if we don't do this work now, when are we going to do it? So thank you to Devi for sharing her wisdom to us and continue the process of unlearning the false beliefs that have been implanted within you from systemic racism and oppression that we were born into, that we are surrounded by, that we are finally dismantling within and without. So this is heavy work. Continue to take care of yourself, but get back in. Don't give up, because if we can dismantle oppression from its very roots and its very core, then we can so quickly create the new paradigm. We're doing it right now by each and every conversation like this. So be sure to share this episode with any of your friends, family members that are looking to perhaps learn more about anti-racism. Maybe they're just opening their minds to it for the first time. I think the points that Devi made and going into the history of it will really help illuminate the path for so many people. So if you loved this episode, I would love to send you a free gift, which is the first half of my unreleased book, Eat Right for Your Mind Body Type. This is a different book than Eat Feel Fresh, my first book ever, which is not released anywhere. And I am gifting it exclusively to those who leave a review of my podcast in the iTunes store. So all you got to do is head over to iTunes where you may be listening to this podcast and leave a review. Take a screenshot that you've left it and email it over to me at Sahara@eatfeelfresh.com. Again, that's Sahara, Sahara, at eatfeelfresh.com. And I will send you back the first half of my unreleased book, Eat Right for Your Mind Body Type, which goes all into Ayurveda, doshas, plant-based nutrition, body types, all of the things in a really fun and engaging way. So this is my gift to you for free for supporting the podcast. Every single review I personally read. It really helps the podcast be listened to by more people so we can raise the vibration of the planet together. And I am so grateful to have you on this journey. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. Namaste.